Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhnio. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and right now I present to all of you the latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of August the 28th. So join, watch this video, like it, share it, subscribe. And I have to say that right now, when I'm recording this video, outside there is some bombing here in Ukrainian capital in Kiev, where I do live, and you should understand in which circumstances we have to work, and we should inform not only Ukrainians but also all entire world. So right now I'm working just right here, and outside I hear bombing. Let's begin to overview the Ukrainian battlefield.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Let's begin our review with the battle map presented by the Deep State resource. And it is based on Deep State's information that we start our analysis. This analysis concerns both the map and in general the events taking place here. So earlier there were statements from Deep State the day before yesterday that the settlements of Zaporizhzhia and Novohryhorivka had been captured. Yesterday this was officially acknowledged for the first time by the General Staff. Well, in other words, it didn't take long for them to finally acknowledge the obvious reality that the enemy is advancing here. This in fact brings us back once again to the issue of truthfulness in reports and briefings. Without going into further details, today I will share a very unpleasant story that directly concerns this direction, a story that leads to very, to put it mildly, unpleasant consequences, if not to say tragic ones, when lies result in such situations. So what do we have here? Yesterday, the spokesperson for the General Staff admitted that the Russians are present both in Zaporizhzhia and in Novohryhorivka. It is now quite clear that the enemy is already advancing from this southern Donetsk direction. Personally, I had certain concerns that the area of Timirivka, the movement here, and the area of Zeleny Polya would eventually be used by the enemy to try to get into the rear of our Huliaipol group. These concerns have not materialized so far. Instead, the enemy is moving somewhat differently. They are moving towards Ternove, Berezove, towards Sosnivka and Vorone, right here. What is their intention? What is their goal? In fact, it's not just Zaporizhzhia and Novohryhorivka, meaning not only this area, which is the territory of Dnipropetrovsk region, where the enemy is already present, but also the area around the settlements of Malivka and Vorone, where stabilization actions are currently taking place. The 225th Assault Regiment is working to drive out and prevent the occupiers from reaching Vorone, from occupying this settlement. If, nevertheless, the occupiers manage to pull off this kind of pincer movement, and right now they are indeed advancing in a pincer-like manner, their main goal is to encircle Kamyshevaha, to cut it off from communications, essentially to create a pocket, and thus push back our garrison or completely encircle it in this area. Because the Kamyshevaha defensive strongpoint is very difficult for the enemy to capture. That's why they are trying to exploit the gaps they found in our defenses there. Usually this happens either at the junctions between units during rotations or during certain events that are marked by some degree of disorganization or mistakes. And it's these mistakes that the Russians typically take advantage of. In other words, they usually try to break through where things are weakest. And now there are threats emerging for Kamyshevaha and advances in the Dnipropetrovsk direction, but nothing more than that. Of course, this is a significant threat and it needs to be taken into account. But at the moment, the necessary assault actions are being carried out. As I already mentioned, the 225th Assault Regiment is operating here in Voronove to drive the enemy out of these areas and prevent them from forming pincers. But let me return to the settlement of Novohryhorivka. Here we have Novohryhorivka, south of Kamyshevaha, the very Novohryhorivka that until recently, let me repeat, the General Staff said was not captured. That is, the spokesperson for the General Staff said it was not captured. We had serious problems here. The guys here whose unit I am deliberately not naming, the guys who were working here basically walked into an enemy ambush, essentially into an enemy ambush. Why did this happen? Because of the lies, which, as Deep State says, will be the end of us all. And Deep State eventually talked about this in their video. In yesterday's briefing, they discussed the situation in the Novomykhailivka direction and specifically reported that one of the units carrying out a mission here was planning its actions in Novohryhorivka, counter-assault actions. He was studying situational awareness and thus received information from an adjacent unit about the composition of enemy forces here and what positions they actually held. The main issue here is about the positions. And so because of the transmission of false information, our soldiers went in and basically, you could call it an ambush, because everything imaginable was thrown at them. This happened because our own servicemen and their adjacent units provided false information. This was reported by Deep State, and honestly, this is an outrageous incident. I think you can guess for yourself how such cases of false reporting of actual information in different sections of the front usually end. That's exactly and precisely why we absolutely shouldn't be surprised when significant factors like SZH clearly appear. SZH is when you become disillusioned with the system. Yesterday, I skipped over the information that was published the day before in response to a request from Ukrainska Pravda to the Office of the Prosecutor General regarding the rate of SZH, unauthorized abandonment of units, that exists in Ukraine. This problem is very serious, very serious. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, here is this infographic prepared by the Telegram channel Infactum, which is quite friendly to my own Telegram community, which I encourage you to subscribe to. This is the Telegram channel Pino. It's my own channel. I run it myself, so join it, friends. There is a link in the description of this video. And here, as you can see on the screen, this is the link to that Telegram channel. If you want to look for it, of course, it exists in the search bar of this social network. It's at @pinion_news. So getting back to this infographic, what does it show? It shows the rate of unauthorized departures from units broken down by year, how many soldiers left their military units without permission each year. As of now, from the beginning of the full-scale invasion until today, about 200,000 cases have been registered. 200,000 cases. Just imagine what an incredibly huge number that is. In addition to this, up to 50,000 cases have been recorded regarding desertion. Yes, people do return to service, but at the same time, the number of those who simply turn around and leave the military is staggering. These numbers are increasing every year. In 2025, many factors come into play: fatigue, uncertainty about the length of service, and forced mobilization, which, in the fourth year of the full-scale invasion, is bringing into the war people who are far from the most motivated. This leads to record rates of AWOL cases, over 110,500 cases. Proceedings regarding AWOL were registered in just 7 months of 2025. The year 2025 will simply be a record-breaking year. But when you hear such lies, which will really destroy us all, which will simply destroy us all, the truth needs to be told about this. This is exactly what Deep State always emphasizes and stresses. And this information about Novomykhailivka that I am sharing, friends, is also for you. The truth needs to be told about this. People need to be held accountable. I'm not just talking about the intelligence officers. I'm talking about those who lie, who report false information to cover their own backsides. This is a truly catastrophic and pervasive problem that significantly haunts us. In some exceptionally good units, it doesn't exist at all, but in many others, it's unfortunately quite rampant and widespread. And unfortunately, we often have to deal with such realities. Moreover, yesterday a bill was presented in Parliament that provides for 5 to 10 years in prison for servicemen who disobey a commander's order. I don't have the right to evaluate this initiative, but after talking to a number of military personnel, I want to say that this will be chaos. I'm not judging here whether it's right or wrong to introduce and strengthen this responsibility, because it already exists now. But not all commanders are perfect. And this, by the way, is one of the fears that future mobilized soldiers or future recruits or reservists or anyone who hasn't yet been involved with the military have: the fear of ending up under the command, to put it mildly, of a commander who's a brute. That's putting it mildly. But I paid attention to another aspect when we talk about such responsibility, about willful disobedience to a commander's order. Tell me, who are the judges? Even now, in the fourth year of the full-scale invasion, we have a problem. We don't have competent judges who could assess from a military perspective certain circumstances, such as failure to follow an order. An order can be criminal, an order can indeed be criminal. Who has the right, who has the competence to objectively consider this issue? That is, there can be a criminal order that you refuse to carry out, but instead the leadership prosecutes you for insubordination to the commander's order. This is a very slippery slope. And I say again, I don't have the right to speak on behalf of the military, but it seems to me that this is quite a dangerous path that those initiators are taking who want to introduce this kind of responsibility, because no one is striving to engage in a systemic reform of military justice. Instead, everyone is ready to toughen responsibility. In my opinion, this is not an okay situation. Going back to, I've just said some rather grim and unpleasant things, but this cold shower is something we all need to experience in order to understand what's really going on. Returning to the Novomykhailivka direction. There are currently quite a lot of assault units operating here. By the way, I mentioned that the 225th Assault Regiment is currently operating in Voronezh, driving out the enemy. I showed this video just a few days ago in Zeleny High, whose liberation was reported by the General Staff. By the way, it's worth noting that for now, deep state analysts shouldn't rush to change the color of Zeleny High. I spoke with them and they say the situation there is still quite unstable. The enemy is entering both Zeleny High and towards Iskra, Andriivka, Klivtsova, and in the area of Tolshty, the enemy is also operating within these vast gray zones. Therefore, according to them, it's still too early to talk about fully establishing or restoring control over these settlements. And this is what I'm actually getting at. There are quite a lot of assault units operating in this direction. Well, for example, the same settlement of Zeleny High, which the commander-in-chief mentioned on Independence Day, saying that it had supposedly been cleared. Here, the 214th Assault Battalion, OP4, is making the maximum effort. Excellent fighters who, since the defense of Pokrovsk, the Pokrovsk agglomeration, have probably established themselves here as one of the strongest. I mean, the Avdiivka-Pokrovsk agglomeration, they accompanied the entire retreat from Avdiivka to Pokrovsk in the most intense and most difficult battles, sometimes finding themselves in very challenging situations that had to be resolved, including through media pressure. They are doing everything they possibly can to clear Zeleny High, but the enemy is also pushing hard here. So what am I getting at with all of this? Right now on the Novomykhailivka direction, there are a lot of assault units operating, like OP4 and the 225th as well. These assault units were recently combined into a single structure by Syrsky, the assault forces of the armed forces of Ukraine. To be honest, it's not entirely clear why this was done, because we already have the air assault forces, but, well, again, who am I to criticize the commander-in-chief? But I understand perfectly well that from time to time we create a lot of parallel structures, like how the army of drones was created at one time as a counterpart to the OSBS. Although there was a certain logic to it as well. It was clear that not everything was going smoothly in the relationship between the former OSBS commander and the way, let's say, this combat work was being conducted. Now we apparently have, so to speak, both airborne assault troops and at the same time assault troops of the armed forces have been created. These are also somewhat parallel structures. Well, again, I'm not going to criticize here. I'm just stating the fact. There are many assault units operating here. What is the essence and what is the most interesting thing, the key point of what is happening? Many of them previously operated in the Sumy direction. Many. The same 225th Assault Regiment, the same 33rd Assault Regiment, which I will be talking about today. By the way, the former commander of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, Colonel Manko, led this assault regiment, the 33rd Assault Regiment. And now he has just become the commander of these newly created assault forces of the armed forces of Ukraine. So previously they operated in the Sumy region, and now they are working precisely in the Donetsk direction. And from this you can draw, well, at least two conclusions. That the Sumy region is no longer a priority. Specifically, it has ceased to be a priority for the occupiers who, as is known, are redirecting their units from the Sumy region to the Donetsk direction. And they don't have the forces to continue advancing in the Sumy region. All the more so, they don't have the strength to encircle or block the logistics of Sumy itself. That is, the enemy is withdrawing its units from there. Basically, they have pulled out most of their reserves, about 2/3, maybe even more. They are even withdrawing their main units, which shows, let's say, how low a priority the events in the Sumy region have become for them. And so the enemy has started redeploying its troops to the Donetsk region. We are responding in kind. Sumy region has ceased to be a priority direction for them. The Donetsk direction remains a priority. And we are responding in kind, redeploying units here from the Sumy direction. That's the first conclusion. The second conclusion is that the situation here in Donetsk region is actually extremely difficult and requires the involvement of assault units. Right now, to some extent, well, these are the elite of the armed forces who are carrying out these assault operations. Although these extensive and challenging assault operations are proving to be very, very difficult to execute successfully, they are absolutely essential. I actually mentioned that the 33rd Assault Regiment, I'll be talking about them as well. It has been transferred, well, at least partially, to the Zaporizhzhia direction, to the area of the most intense enemy advance near the settlement of Plavne. Plavne is, in fact, almost captured by the enemy. Right now, there are two hotspots here, Plavne and Stepnohirsk. And you could also name a third settlement. This is Prymorske. Don't be surprised. Here is Prymorske. Don't be surprised that it seems so far away. In reality, it's not as far as it might seem to you. Here is Prymorske. What is this? Why can't it be outlined? Everything will be ready in a moment. So here is Prymorske. It's quite a peculiar settlement. You'll understand everything now when I show its administrative boundaries. Here is Prymorske, you see, and right now the enemy is actually threatening the southern outskirts of Prymorske, Stepnohirsk, and Plavne, which in fact he has almost already captured. And now the enemy is advancing beyond Plavne. This movement has been shown repeatedly by the same journalistic deep staters, and I have talked about it as well. In fact, the enemy has already been spotted in these southern areas of Prymorske and is trying to approach Stepnohirsk. How do we draw this conclusion? Here we return to the mention of the 33rd Assault Regiment. It was transferred from the Sumy region to Zaporizhzhia, and it is precisely the 33rd Assault Battalion that is now demonstrating its actions in this direction. These shots were taken and verified by our OSINT specialists precisely on the southern outskirts of the village of Prymorske. These shots indicate that the soldiers carried out an assault on enemy positions in the southern part of this settlement and captured several occupiers. Well, it's good that the 33rd Assault Regiment, such an experienced unit, is operating here, but the fact that the enemy is already there, already on the southern outskirts of Prymorske, from where they can put pressure on Stepnohirsk, is alarming. It's alarming, and this does not contribute to the further defense of Stepnohirsk. And Stepnohirsk, let me remind you, is, if not a key, then a very important settlement for the defense of the entire Zaporizhzhia direction, because from there, two prospects open up, which I will remind you about after we finish watching the video from the 33rd Separate Assault Brigade, showing the capture of Russian occupiers in the settlement of Prymorske. Why is Stepnohirsk important? It's necessary to shed light on this story. So, the settlement of Stepnohirsk and the heights nearby allow, in the event of occupation, of course, for the Russians to perform two functions. The first function is terrorist shelling, terrorizing Zaporizhzhia. From here, from Stepnohirsk, there is a vantage point over a 25-kilometer zone from which they can reach Zaporizhzhia. Right now, the distance is actually about the same, 20 to 25 kilometers. Essentially, these are kill zones with a radius of 20 to 25 kilometers around Kherson. And this is a very difficult situation. In general, life in Kherson becomes unbearably impossible when the occupiers control these areas within such kill zones at this very distance. And this is what the Russians are aiming for in Stepnohirsk by capturing it to reach the southern outskirts of Zaporizhzhia with such shelling. The second thing is the ability to control logistics through Kamyshevaha as well. Here it's about 17 to 18 kilometers. This is the highway that connects Orikhiv with the city of Zaporizhzhia. So Orikhiv, as we know, is the main defense hub in the Zaporizhzhia direction. Zaporizhzhia, well, is Zaporizhzhia. There's nothing more to add here. And from Stepnohirsk, you can also reach with drones, carry out such raids on the main logistics route supplying Orikhiv. That's why they're moving here. That's why they're trying to do this here. Well, and the 33rd Assault Regiment has been redeployed from Sumy region to Zaporizhzhia. We can already confirm this. The direction I'll finish my review with today is Lyman. Nothing is changing here. Unfortunately, things are only getting worse in most locations. The situation is worsening in the area of the settlement of Torske, where enemy advances have been observed, and in the settlement of Kolodyazi. This essentially means further advances closer to Lyman. So right here and here, then Stavy, and further south, right here is where Lyman is located. The Russians are trying to encircle Lyman from as many sides as possible. That is, recently they have advanced in the area of the settlement of Zelena Dolina, now Kolodyazi, Torske, between Torske and Zarychny. Zarychny is a village on the right bank of the Jerebets River, while Torske is on the left bank of the Jerebets River. Between Zarychny and Yampil, the enemy is already appearing on the road that connects them. Here is where the road runs, and along this road, the enemy is already delivering strikes in this area as well. In addition, there remains a very dangerous section of our presence in the Shribyansky forestry right here, which the enemy is trying to cut off by striking Dronivka, which in fact provides logistics for this small area of swampy terrain in the Shribyansky forestry. But the point is that the enemy is pressing from all sides toward its main objective in this direction. That objective is the settlement of Lyman, which in 2022 was both captured by the enemy and then recaptured by our forces. But now, around it, well, you see for yourself what kind of atmosphere is forming, an atmosphere of very intense pressure in this direction. However, there are, of course, also some positive news here. To the north, there is also the settlement of Novomykhailivka, whose liberation was jointly reported by the fighters of the main intelligence directorate and the 3rd Assault Brigade. In Rakivka, movements of our troops have been observed, and it is quite likely that we can expect some improvements or news here in the future. But despite this, that's not all. Because in the Lyman direction, well, the situation is far from ideal for us at the moment. That's how things are, friends. Today's review turned out to be somewhat discouraging, but such ones happen too, because there simply is no such thing as a war painted in positive tones. Thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best. Leave a like, subscribe to us, and write your comments. Goodbye.